So, welcome, Professor Bruno Drweski, and today we will talk about the foreign policy of the Poland before Second World War. It was a subject very famous 1 year ago when President of Russia Vladimir Putin he published many documents interesting about the Polish ambassador in Berlin, and also about the collaboration of Polish and German when Hitler was in power. So, Professor Bruno, first question: what, in opinion, in anti-communist propaganda which we have now, Poland is shown like ally of the Western countries, France and England, and all the time they said that in the West we have democracy. Polish was the democracy state, and we have the alliance of the democratic states against the totalitarian states, Germany and Soviet Union. Could you tell us something about the diplomatic relation between Poland, the Minister Beck, and the Minister Ribbentrop?
Maybe we have to first to begin with the fact that up to 1926, Poland was what we can say a liberal democracy, which was based on strong friendship with France, not with England, because England at the Versailles Treaty was not really in favor of Poland. But the alliance with France was very strong up to 1926. In 1926, Piłsudski made a coup and took the power in Warsaw, and he will have the power until his death in 1935. France was not very happy with Piłsudski, because Piłsudski was always considered as a man who has no link with France, who was more or less collaborating with the Germans during the First World War, and also because Piłsudski was one of the founders of the Socialist Party. He was considered as somebody that could have some link with socialism, even if it was not the case at that time. So from 1926, the relation between France and Poland began to worsen. And on the side of Piłsudski, also we have to know that Piłsudski was never was in this field. He was quite realistic. He was always convinced that France is not a real ally for Poland, because the French will never fight for Polish interests, because they have their own interest and they don't really care about Eastern Europe. That was his point of view. And of course, England was considered rather as a country, as a power that was officially an ally, but in fact that was playing France against Germany and Germany against France, and looking at Poland as a country too near of France, with France, so not a real ally. And that's the point in 1926. But of course, we have to remember at that time, Germany was also a liberal democratic country up to 1933. And the situation will change when Hitler will arrive in power. That's the first point. The second point is that basically the Piłsudski regime was anti-Russian and anti anti-communist and anti-Soviet. Piłsudski was always considering that even before the Russian Revolution, that the Russians are the worst neighbor of Poland, that Poland is the vanguard of Western civilization in Eastern Europe, that Germans are enemy of Poland, but still a civilized country, with whom compromise are possible. And of course, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia worsened the relation of Piłsudski towards Russia, toward Soviet Russia, and later toward Soviet Union. And that's very important. We have to remember that a lot of forces in Polish administration, and especially in the foreign affairs, were concentrated on the what we call the neo-Prometheism, which was a theory that nations that are part of Soviet Union should be helped to gain their independence against Soviet Union, and there were Warsaw was one of the main center of the anti-Soviet emigrations from Soviet Union, not only of Soviet Republic near Poland, like Ukraine and Belarus, but also from Georgia and Caucasus Republic, and they were helped publishing literature, preparing some change against Soviet Union, and that's very important to have that in mind. The situation, of course, changed when the Nazi began to be powerful, and they seized the power in Germany in 1933. But we have to remember also that in the north of Poland we had the so-called free town of Danzig or Gdańsk, and this city, this free city, was almost an independent country within the let's say the custom area of Polish Republic. So it means economically Danzig, Gdańsk was Polish, but politically, culturally, it was under local self-government, which was German. And what is very important is that the Nazi party arrived in Danzig, Gdańsk, and the power earlier than in Germany. And the Polish government didn't react against that. The Polish government accepted the fact that the Nazi forbid every political party in Danzig city, except the Polish minority party. Because there were a Polish minority, national minority party. This party was still legal under the Nazi government, but all other parties, communists, socialists, liberals, and so on, were forbid, and the Polish government didn't react against that. It accepted the Nazification of Gdańsk, Danzig earlier than in Germany, and that's very important. At some time, even Hitler thought to go to Danzig because he was fearing that maybe his party will be forbid in Germany and he will have to be a refugee in Danzig, in Gdańsk. This didn't happen, but the fact that he could think about that is important. But in the same time, we have also to know that the Piłsudski regime was a tough, authoritarian, militaristic regime, but it was not a truly fascist regime because they had no political party, and officially and to a certain extent, the opposition party were illegal in Poland. That's the first thing. Also, I would say that the Piłsudski regime was rather a traditional conservative regime rather than a, let's say, middle-class totalitarian petit bourgeois nationalist fascistic regime, especially because in Poland, the fascists were in opposition to the Polish government. The right wing, the extreme right was against the Piłsudski government. And because of that, when Hitler began to be powerful in Germany, but before he came to power in Germany, the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs developed the theory that Poland was a regional power that can lead a very strong policy, an independent policy, and Poland has the capacity to be a strong power, at least in Eastern Europe. But to be a strong power, Poland needs to have a balanced relation with all its neighbors, and that explains why in 1932, fearing that the Nazi will arrive in Germany in power, they took something like an insurance, and they concluded with Soviet Union a pact of non-aggression. In 1932, Poland and Soviet Union concluded the pact of non-aggression of the two countries. But in the reality, we can say that this treaty stabilized relation between Warsaw and Moscow, but no real new relation happened between the two countries. The two countries were still in a situation I would call it of Cold War, diplomatic Cold War after this treaty, but still Cold War. And when the Nazi arrived in power in the year after, in 1933, it's not sure what was the reaction of Piłsudski. We have different hypotheses. Maybe Poland was fearing the Nazis in power in Germany, and some elements allowed to think they even plan a war against Germany in case Germany would be aggressive. But very quickly, the situation changed, because Hitler offered good relation with Poland. And in 1934, a new treaty was signed of non-aggression, but with Germany. So we had officially the Treaty of Non-Aggression between Poland and Soviet Union signed in 1932, and in 1934, the Treaty of Non-Aggression signed by Poland with the Third Reich. And officially, the Polish policy up to the Second World War was then that Poland is a regional power that has balanced relation with all its neighbors, and the treaty with Soviet Union and with Germany shows that Poland don't want to take part in any conflicts between Nazism and communism, between Soviet Union and Germany, and Poland has a peaceful, powerful relation with all its neighbors. That was the official theory, and on paper it was right, but in reality it was not the same, because as I told, the treaty with Soviet Union was just a treaty that stabilized diplomatic relations, not changing anything in the economical relations, not changing anything in cultural relations. Still, the border between the two countries were almost closed, and it was very, very difficult to develop any any kind of Soviet, let's say, cultural events in Poland or Polish cultural event in Soviet Union. Poles even didn't want to do anything in Soviet Union. And as I told you earlier, the neo-Prometheical organization anti-Soviet emigration in Poland was still active and was functioning as earlier, in spite of the non-aggression treaty with Soviet Union. With Germany, situation went in a complete different direction, because since the treaty was signed, the relation between Poland and Germany became in fact very close on cultural level, on economical level.
Yes, Bruno, but we have to set the people who will listen this why Polish politicians can say that Poland was a regional power. It is because the Germany had an army.
Yes, of course it was.
Yes, because people don't understand how it is possible that Piłsudski can imagine that he will attack Germany. It is not because Poland was powerful, but because Germany wasn't had an army.
Of course.
Yes, and it's.
Of course, you're right. You're right. And Poland also thought it was a powerful country, which was a pure illusion, because Poland was supposed to have won the war with Soviet Russia in 1921. I'm against this theory, because in fact, if you look at the war, the Polish-Soviet war, ended with a compromise of two balanced powers. But in the Polish self-arrogance, I would say, the war with Russia was a pure victory. And it shows that Poland was very strong and that Russia was nothing. So the idea that Poland was a victorious country against one power, former big power, and that Germany was supposed to be a power, but as you say, it was not anymore a power in 1933, later of course, but not at that moment, created this illusion that Poland was a strong power. But of course, the evolution of the events will show that the situation is completely different. So I would say that from 1934, Poland not only didn't react to the development of German militarism, of German powerfulness, and so on, but looked at what is happening in Germany as something that will never be a danger for Poland. And inside the Polish elite, you had different theses that were going in that direction. For example, it was very popular in the governmental circle that the idea that Germany was bad in the 19th century because it was under Prussian rule. Since Hitler was an Austrian, and a lot of Nazis were coming from southern Germany and not northern Germany, they were supposed to be not Prussian. And since they were not Prussian, their German expansionism will not go against Poland like the Prussian one did, but rather will go to the former Austrian Empire. It means in the direction of the Balkans, in the direction of Czechoslovakia, and Poland that do not interest these South Germans because they are not Prussians. Of course, it's a pure illusion because, as we know, the Nazis had a worldwide view, and for them, Germany had to expand everywhere. and not only in a regional sphere in the south of Germany. But this illusion was functioning among Polish elite. The second illusion that functioned among Polish elite was the fact that Russians are a barbaric nation, but Germans are a civilized nation. Of course, Hitler and his men are a little bit savage, but basically the German nation is a civilized nation, and earlier or later Hitler and his Nazis will be civilized. Because it's a civilized nation, so the civilization will adopt them or will change them. So we have not to be very fearful of Hitler in Germany, because earlier or later the traditional German elite will manage Nazis to behave in a civilized way. And what I say had consequences, for example, because there was a strong German minority in Poland of about a little bit less than 1 million people. And this German minority was very important, not only because it was 1 million people, but it was also a very important minority, because a large part, an important, let's say, part of this minority was the industrial bourgeoisie of Silesia or Łódź area, or aristocratic Junkers, aristocratic landowners in the western Poland, in Poznań area and Bydgoszcz area. So it was a very powerful elite, which was rich, which had money. So this minority was much more, I mean, no comparison with other national minorities in Poland, which were rather poor, like the Ukrainians or the Belarusians, or when you had something like a bourgeoisie within the Jewish minority, you had a mass of very, very poor Jews, which was the big majority of the Jews in Poland were very, very poor. In the case of the German minority, of course, you had some Germans which were from popular classes, for example, workers in the Silesian area. But basically, most of the Germans in Poland were middle class or higher middle class. So, of course, the German minority was a rich minority, was a powerful minority, and was a minority that could be linked with the new German regime. The Nazi regime, but who at the beginning was not, because it was rather a right-wing conservative minority, which was anti-Polish, and which was used by the German government of the Weimar Republic era against Poland. So when Hitler arrived to power, and Hitler needed to have the support of Poland, because he was at the beginning in a situation where he had no good relation with anybody outside Germany, France, England, Soviet Union, of course, even Mussolini's Italy at that time were fearful of Hitler, and Hitler wanted to find an ally. And then he found in Poland this possibility to sign this treaty in 1934, and Poland did bargain with Hitler something that was a pure illusion, but of course it worked at the beginning. It means that the German minority in Poland is not loyal to the Polish state. So we will ask the German Reich, the Third Reich, to discipline that minority so that that minority will be loyal. And of course, Hitler did that. He organized the German minority in a way that this minority could look like a loyal minority toward the Polish state. Of course, they were preparing the aggression against Poland later, but formally, the German-Polish press, the German-Polish schools were teaching something that were apparently much more loyal toward Polish state than the former behavior of this minority during the Weimar Republic. But the consequences of that was that the Polish government accepted the complete Nazification of the German minority. It means, in fact, Poland and Germany, Poland and the Third Reich, collaborated in the destruction of every German minority organization which were not Nazis. It means, of course, the traditional, let's say, conservative German associations in Poland, but also the communist or the social democrat groups of German minority in Poland, which were forbidden under Polish regime, supposedly because the Nazis were the most loyal toward Poland organization, which were a pure crack, because they were preparing the list of people to be arrested in 1939, but of course they did that secretly. And what is also very a scandal is that I told you that there was a German minority in Poland of about 1 million, but there was also in Germany, on the borderlands, a Polish minority of 1.5 million. And Poland didn't really help that minority, which because Polish government didn't want to complicate its relation with the Third Reich. So the Third Reich Nazified the German minority of Poland, but on the other side, they didn't allow much to the Polish minority on the German side of the border. And we have also to notice that fact, that in fact Poland was behaving as not as a power, but as a country, giving Germans more than to the German more than the German gave to the Poles. In the same time, we can say that the Polish hierarchy, especially when Piłsudski died, it means after 1935, they were not Nazi, but they were convinced that the worst thing is communism, and that Nazism is something not really good, but something that to a certain extent is efficient, because it turned Germany into a apparently healthy economic state, and that some of Nazi method should be taken in Poland. That's one thing, and especially in the Ministry of Interior, of Internal Affairs in Poland, there was quite a strong tendency to see that the Germans, of course, the Nazi Germans, solved a political problem Germany had with the communists, with the left opposition, and in a certain sense, it's positive, even if their regime is a little bit terroristic, but still, it's not so bad. And in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, they even decided to send because in 1934, Polish government created what we can call a concentration camp for political prisoners, the camp of Bereza Kartuska, and let's say the guardians of this camp were sent to the German camp of Dachau for education. Of course, nobody wants to say that now in Poland, because of course it's terribly shameful that the Dachau, let's say, the Dachau SS guardians trained the Polish guardians of the Bereza Kartuska camp. But it's something, you know, something terrible, but it's something that has to be remembered, even if nobody in Poland really wants to hear about that. Even left people prefer not to, because it's so shameful. You have not to talk about that. It's impossible. I discovered, in fact, that in one article and the historical section of the weekly Politica in the 80s. There was one article about that, because even at that time it was very difficult in Poland to accept this fact, which is something so shameful that for Poles, but for all Europe, for all the world, it's something shameful that, you know, a country which is supposed to be independent, which is supposed to be more or less democratic, is sending its guardians to the training in Dachau. So we have to know about that, and we have to talk about that, because it's very important. Because it's very symbolical. It means, you know, that officially Poland was in between Germany and Soviet Union, was having a non-aggression treaty with both countries, but in fact, the relation with Germany was very strong, and with Soviet Union was very cold. And this was again more and more obvious when Piłsudski died, because Piłsudski, whatever we think about him, was somebody that was coming from the Socialist Party, and Piłsudski was always against any form of let's say racism or any form of ethnical nationalism, and of course he was against any form of anti-Semitism, because we have to recognize him. One good thing he did when he arrived in power after a coup. One of his first decisions was to give the Polish citizenship to about 300,000 Jews who were living in Poland, but as a result of civil war in Russia, they arrived in Poland and they didn't receive the Polish citizenship until 1926. And in 1926, Piłsudski decided that these Jews should receive the Polish citizenship, and he did it. So, you know, he was not an anti-Semite, that's for sure. He was a dictator, that's also for sure. He was not anymore socialist, that's for sure. He was more and more right-wing and more conservative, that's for sure. But he was not for ethnical nationalism, for racist nationalism. His ideal was a Poland of loyal citizens of different religions and different languages. And that was his ideal. So we must know that up to his death in 1935, he rather refrained tendencies to take example from the German internal policy inside the Polish regime. But when he died in 1935, his successors coming from the same regime, of course, were much more convinced that the so-called Nazi methods were efficient to develop country. That's for the economical and social aspect of the thing. And in the other side, they were also convinced that France is not a good ally, and that cooperation with Germany is no threat to Poland, and to Polish independence. So when Austria was occupied by Germany, Poland didn't react. And when the Sudeten crisis began with Czechoslovakia, Poles were just waiting to cooperate with Germany in what we can say the partition of Czechoslovakia, because of course Germany received some part of the Czechoslovak territory, Hungary received another part, and Poland received another part. And Czechoslovak state then failed to exist. So we can say that in the Czechoslovak crisis, Poland didn't defend his, let's say, Slavic brother of Czechoslovakia, but took the side of Germany. Officially, it was not a cooperation, but in fact, it was a cooperation because Poland didn't accept any form of supporting Czechoslovakia. And of course, Poland didn't accept the fact that Soviet troops could go to Czechoslovakia through the Polish territory to help Czechoslovak army in case Czechoslovakia would defend itself. And that's why Czechoslovakia was forced to capitulate, because there was no ally on Czech border. All countries surrounding Czechoslovakia collaborated in the destruction of Czechoslovakia: Germany, Hungary, and Poland. Of course, under the approval of France and Great Britain, and of course Mussolini's Italy, but basically we can say that Polish government in 1938 behaved shamelessly, and it's the second great shame of the Polish policy at that time, and it shows that the Polish government was completely unaware that the fact of that the Nazis were planning an expansion all over Europe, and including Poland. But of course, this idea that Poland was supposed to be a strong power explain why the Second World War burst, because up to the end of Czechoslovakia, there was, in fact, a cooperation between Poland and Germany. But when Czechoslovakia was occupied by Germans, then the Germans the Nazi Germany wanted to take back the so-called free city of Danzig or Gdańsk, and to create an extraterritorial or it means a German-controlled highway between mainland German mainland and Germany's East Prussia. And of course, then suddenly, in the middle of the summer, at the end of the spring 1939, the Polish leaders understood that Germany was tending to blockade the access of Poland to the sea, and changing Poland into an economical colony of the Third Reich. And then they began to react, and they didn't accept the German conditions. But of course, it was too late, because up to that time, they accepted everything the German did against their neighbors, and they of course accepted the remilitarization of Germany, and they accepted the Nazification of the German minority in Poland, and they accepted the Nazification of the Gdańsk Free City, and they openly were considered in European diplomacy as a country linked with Germany, even if, as I told you earlier, formally Poland has also a non-aggression treaty with Soviet Union, but it was a pure formal treaty without any real consequences. So we can say that Polish government chose its camp against communism, against Soviet Union, against Russia, with Germany, with, of course, Third Reich. So I don't know.
Okay, so I have two questions for you. First question, could you say something more about this relation between Mussolini and Hitler in the time when the Hitler take power? Because I didn't heard nothing about this, what you say, because I always thought that it was the alliance that the Italian fascists help NSDAP and Hitler.
At the beginning, it was not the case. Why? Because in Austria, when the Nazi took power in Germany, Austria was under what is called the Austrofascism. It was a local form of fascism, which was very linked with Italy. And that's the first thing. The second thing is that Mussolini did fear that Hitler, taking the control of Austria, will want to control what the German called the South Tyrol, which is in Italy, which is a territory belonging to Italy. So for the first time, when Hitler arrived in power in Germany, Italy sent its troops at the Austrian border to show that Italy will not accept the annexation of Austria by the German Reich. And of course, Italy will protect the Austro-fascist government, which was in Vienna. The thing changed later when Italy attacked Ethiopia. And later, Italy supported Spanish Franco, the fascist in Spain. Then the cooperation between the Third Reich and Italy began, and at that moment, Mussolini decided that okay, Hitler, you can take Austria. I do not support anymore Austria. It's yours. And in the on the other side, Hitler decided that since Mussolini is very friendly, he will not demand the South Tyrol, which is a German land in Italy, but which will stay Italian. And that's the only territory with German minority that the Third Reich didn't annex during the Second World War, at least as long as Mussolini was in power in Italy. That's the only exception in the German expansionism is this South Tyrol question, which Hitler accepted to not to take for Germany because of this loyalty, so-called, that Mussolini showed during the invasion of Austria by the Third Reich. But at the very beginning, of course, the situation between Italian fascists and Nazi were not good. But we have to understand that fascism, it's nationalism. So it's completely normal That's when people say that communism and fascism is the same thing. Of course, it's a pure idiocy for a lot of reasons. But among one of the reason is the fact that communism is based on internationalism. So every communist is brother of every communist all over the world. It's the base of the one of the fundamental base of Marxism, Leninism, and of course communism. But for the fascists, it's completely different. The fascists have the same or very similar ideology all over the world, of course, but they believe that every nation is in competition with another nation. So that's why the Polish fascists were against Germany. And that's why the Polish fascists were anti-German during the Third Reich, because they were looking at Hitler as a strong and healthy man making good things for Germany, and if he makes good things for Germany, it's bad for Poland, because they're anti-German. And same thing with Italy and Germany. At the beginning, the Italian fascism was thinking that Hitler is very good for Germany, but Germany is a threat for Italy, because it's not an ally. So fascists of different countries do not cooperate. They just cooperate where they find that they have common national interest. But the base of their ideology is nationalism, not internationalism. So the fascists don't cooperate if they have different national interests. They cooperate on ideological ground, but they will never cooperate on political ground as soon as there are territorial dispute or strategical contradiction between one country and the other. And that's all the history of fascism is like that. If we look, for example, I told you that Polish fascists were against Germany. I told you that the Italian fascists at the beginning were against Germany, then they changed mind because they find compromise with Germany. I told you that Italian and German fascists supported Franco in Spain, but fascists in Portugal were on the side of Great Britain and not on the side of the Third Reich during the Second World War. So, depending on their so-called national interests, they could change. They could have different views. If you look in Asia, that's the same. Germany, Third Reich, was allied with Japan, but at the beginning of the 30s, Chiang Kai-shek, who is to a certain extent a Chinese fascist, sent to Germany his son to be trained in the German Wehrmacht. And the cooperation between Chiang Kai-shek, Kuomintang, and Nazi party in Germany was okay. But at a certain moment, Third Reich decided to take the side of Japan against, let's call them Chinese fascists. So the whole history of fascism is a history of national contradiction within a common ideology. And that's, of course, a basic difference with communism, which starts with the idea that all human beings are brother. Fascism starts with the ideology that all human beings are in competition. Individual competition, local competition, national competition, racial competition. And intelligent fascists, let's say, develop very consequent theories about that. For example, in Poland, Drweski, which was the founder of the let's say, the national ethnical Polish right wing and later fascism, was admiring Hitler, but he considered that Hitler was an enemy. Because he was German and he was developing Germany. He was an anti-Semite, but he was thinking that Zionism is a very good ideology for the Jews, because the Jews is a race that ultimately needs state, as every race. He was against Jews in Poland, but he was supporting Jews in Palestine. Not Jews, excuse me. He was supporting Zionists in Palestine. Because why? If there is a Jewish fascist state, it's okay. The Jewish problem is solved in Poland. They go to Palestine, and no, they will kill the Arabs. That's their things. That's their duty. That's what they want. That's not our business. But in Poland, they have to be expelled from the country. So, but sometimes he writes things about Jews very positive. But when he writes very positive things about Jews, he writes very positive things about Jewish nationalists, about tribal Jews. And of course, he's completely against any Jews who wants to assimilate in Poland or to participate in a multi-ethnical Poland. That he's against. And especially against the Jews, because the Jews are the national minority, which is the most engaged minority in left-wing internationalism. And that's why he's anti-Semitic, because the Jews want to integrate themselves in the society. So that they are the worst minority, because they want to integrate. You have to expel them, because everybody has to have its own. And then the different homes will fight each other to have more territorial gains, and the stronger will win, and the weaker will finish, will disappear. And that's okay. For them, that's okay. Of course, for us, it's foolishness, but for them, it's okay. I mean, it is what we call the social Darwinism. It means that every species are fighting for life and destroying other species. So fascists can cooperate when they have common ground, common territorial claims, but as soon as they have a contradictory interest over one piece of land, then they fight each other within the same ideology. So that's why the Italian fascists at the beginning was fearing that the German Third Reich will want to annex South Tyrol. So it has to be fought. And up to the moment that Hitler decided, okay, we leave you the South Tyrol, we have much other things to do all over Europe, so okay, stay there in the South Tyrol. It's the price to pay to have an alliance with you. We accept that price, and we accept to betray those Germans in the same time. But that's not a problem. The problem is, of course, that Germany has to lead in the north of Europe, and Italy will lead in Mediterranean, and that was the discussion about between Berlin and Rome. Rome was to keep control of Mediterranean Sea, and Germany of Northern Europe. And then, of course, Italian fascism and German Nazism began to cooperate.
Okay, I would like to ask you about the civil war in Spain. Mm-hmm. And because we had in the beginning of this war, we have two countries, France, who supported the Republic in Spain, and Italy, who
theoretically,
yes, theoretically, but the volunteers to the international brigade can come to France and with arm and go to Spain, and the French police didn't have problem. And Italy, they helped Franco.
Italy and Germany.
Yes. But and after this, we have the split of all Europe. That we had the fascist countries who supported Franco, and the Russia who not supported, but they are against Franco. They
officially at least.
Yes, officially. And the politic of Poland in this time, which are in theory the ally of the France in Poland, they criminalized all the volunteers who
they criminalized. In fact, Poland had a double standard policy, which was a very opportunistic policy. Of course, the criminalization of Poles fighting on the side of the Republic was decided for obvious ideological reason. These people were leftist and mostly communist, so they had to be fight in Spain as they are in Poland. But on the other side, Polish government needed money, and at certain moment of the war, the Polish government did sell arms to the Republicans, to the legal governments of Spain, because just to get money, because Poland was producing some arms, and it was an occasion to make money. So on one side, they send arms for money, and on the other side, they take the citizenship, the Polish citizenship, to the people going to the international brigade, because of course these Polish citizens were left without citizenship because they were fighting on the side of the Republicans.
Yes, but when the Franco he finished the war and he became rule in the Spain,
the Poland recognized the Franco government from the as soon as he won the war.
Okay.
The sympathy of the Polish government was mostly on the Franco side. I say mostly because I have to remind something that I forgot to talk about, is that the fact that from the very beginning, as I told you, Piłsudski was a socialist. And during the 1926 coup, all the left of Poland, including the communists, supported his coup against the right-wing government of Witos and Dmowski. And within the Sanacja regime, it was the name of the regime, within the Piłsudski regime, there was always a fraction of people that were that considered themselves as socialists and even as Marxists, and that were convinced that this regime will go on the left side. And this situation was more and more for them, of course, unbearable, but still it existed to the death of Piłsudski, you had within the regime an organization which was called PPS Nowa Frakcja Rewolucyjna. It means Polish Socialist Party New Revolutionary Fraction, which was on the side of Piłsudski. But when Piłsudski died, as I told you, the regime was more and more openly right-wing, and the majority, let's say, of the left within the regime began to split out. Especially one organization which we will see in People's Poland later. It means in 1937 there was the creation of the Piłsudski, the left. Piłsudski's created what they call Kluby Demokratyczne. It means the Democratic Club, which created the Stronnictwo Demokratyczne, which was the Democratic Party, that we will see in 1944 rejoining the PKWN, the Polish Liberation Committee, and this party will exist throughout all the history of People's Poland. The little Stronnictwo Demokratyczne, the Polish Democratic Party, will exist, and this party is coming from the Piłsudski left, but within the regime. And up to the end of the regime, up to the Second World War, we had another organization which was rather leftist and which was functioning inside the regime, which was called the Związek Naprawy Rzeczypospolitej. It means the Union for the Repair of the Republic, which was openly anti-Nazi, that's for sure, and rather leftist. And this organization was, of course, in minority within the government, but it was quite strong in Western area, especially it was strong in Silesia, where the local voivode, Grażyński, was part of this tendency. And we have to remember, and that's also very important, for the People's Poland, that the city mayor of one of the Silesian city, which is called Ziętek, was part of this left Piłsudski tendency. And in 1939, when the German army conquered Silesia, he fled to the east. And then, of course, he arrived in the territory of Soviet Union. He was all the time in Soviet Union, cooperating with Soviets. And in 1945, he went back. He arrived back in Poland. He was member of the PPR, then of the Polish Worker Party, and he was. He was the voivode, he was the regional leader of Silesia during the 60s and 70s, and he's still now very popular. His memory is very popular in Silesia because he was very engaged in the working class and for the lower classes, to help them during the People's Poland. He created a lot of social initiatives in Silesia, and he began his career as one of the, let's say, middle-level bureaucrat of the Piłsudski regime, and under People's Poland, he was the top leader with Gierek of the Silesian region. Gierek was the first secretary of the party, and he was the przewodniczący Wojewódzkiej Rady Narodowej. It means the president of the
chairman.
But yes, anyway. So he was a very strong man, and when they wanted to destroy his monument now in Poland, now the people mobilized against it. Because it's people in Silesia are very he's still very popular. His memory is very popular as a communist, but who began in the Piłsudski regime. but the left part of the Piłsudski regime, which existed, because as I told you, the fact that at the very beginning of his biography, Piłsudski was a socialist, make that in this regime there was always people more or less linked with the socialist ideology, and that explains why I don't agree to characterize the Piłsudski regime as a fascist regime. I would say rather an authoritarian conservative regime with a left wing inside the regime, but of course most of the left against the regime. That's for sure.
Okay, we are live, and we have one commentator here, which yes. I read. A lot of Italian communists and anarchists joined the Spanish Republicans.
Yeah,
it's, of course, true. And now I will ask you about the relations between Poland and Lithuania, and we have few years before the Second World War, we have very how to say, very bad relations between Poland and Lithuania.
No bad relation, no relation at all. The Polish-Lithuanian border was completely closed from 1921 up to 1938. There was no diplomatic relation. There was the border was completely closed. The two states were officially in state of war. There was no real war, but there was a state of war. So there was no economical relation, no cultural relation, no diplomatic relation, no relation at all between Lithuania and Poland up to 1938, because Poland was accepted. At the beginning, the Polish government, the Polish state, wanted Lithuania to belong to Poland, supposedly because of historical tradition. After a while, they accepted that the Lithuania do not belong to Poland, but Lithuania was considering Vilnius as the capital of Lithuania, and was considering that Poland is occupying this city, and not only the city but the capital of the Lithuania, which was of course unacceptable for Lithuanians. So the situation was a complete state of war, as I told you. But in 1938, when Poland was supposedly a power, regional power, and quite jealous that the fact that Italy occupied Ethiopia, Italy occupied Albania, Germany occupied Austria, Germany occupied Czech region, and later Slovakia. Poland is a strong power, but he cannot occupy any territory. So first of all, as I told you, Poland occupied a little part of Czechoslovakia. And at that moment, the Polish government decided to be tough against Lithuania and to impose the mutual recognition. And you had manifestation in Warsaw that we will conquer Kaunas, the capital of the Lithuania, if they don't accept. And of course, the little Lithuania was forced to accept. And so relation began officially between the two countries in 1938, 1 year before the war. But anyway, it was a forced recognition. In fact, Lithuania never accept the fact that Vilna was in Polish hands. So as soon as Poland was attacked in 1939, they wanted to take back Vilna. no in Polish, Vilnius in Lithuanian, and that's what the Soviet did. When the Soviet occupied the region, they gave back Vilnius to Lithuania in October 1939. And Lithuania occupied this part of former Poland. And we have to remember that Lithuania was not part of Soviet Union from October 1939 up to June 1940.
Okay, my last questions for you is about all these hypotheses of Professor Wieczorkiewicz, who wrote books about the possible alliance Poland with the Germany to attack Soviet Union. What can you say about this, about the talk between the Ribbentrop and Beck, why they meet together, what do they talk?
That's for sure that on the German side, the idea was that the Polish coast has to be in German hands. So the German wanted to give something to the Poles, and better for them was to give them something against Soviet Union, since Soviet Union was the enemy of Nazi Germany. So on the German side, that's for sure that there was proposal to have a joint attack against Soviet Union, a joint Polish-German attack against Soviet Union. The question is what was the reaction in Poland? I would say that some elements inside the Polish regime were for sure in favor of that. But they were not enough powerful inside the regime to force the powerful, let's say, the powerful Poland to accept that, because you had, of course, the majority, I would say, of the regime was in favor of the theory that Poland was a power, and since it was a power, it cannot give back some territories, and especially it cannot give back the only territories that makes Poland a sea country. And this fraction of the regime was stronger, and that's what led to the Second World War, because of course Third Reich couldn't accept that situation, and forced, of course, Poland to accept that through war.
I forget one thing, because I want to also ask if there were people in the Polish government or on the Polish elite who consider possibility of the alliance with Soviet Union to attack Germany. Because after we have this history of Rola Rzymierski or Berling, who
yeah, but that's you had inside the army, as you say, people who had that opinion, but they were not leading people. I mean, Berling or Rola Rzymierski. No, Rola Rzymierski was out of the army at that moment, and Berling was an officer, a higher officer, but he was not. He had no decision power. I would say that inside the regime, the Związek Naprawy Rzeczypospolitej, this union for the repair of the republic, was in favor of something like a cooperation with Soviet Union against Germany. But this group, as I told you, was rather important in Western Poland, but it was not powerful inside the at the top level of the government in Warsaw. So it has no chance to be realized, because I would say in Warsaw there was nobody in the Warsaw elite, in the Warsaw government, in the ministries. There were nobody that was ready to any form of cooperation with Soviet Union. What we can understand, because if you look at the map of Poland, more or less half of Poland, of that Poland that was existing at that time, was peopled by strong concentration of Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities. And it was obvious that this region do not want to belong to Poland. They were forced to belong to Poland. But in any situation when Poland would be at war in the West, this region would leave Poland. And you must ask, so what? But the social base of the Sanacja regime, of the regime that was introduced by Piłsudski, the most powerful social base were the landowners of the eastern Poland, which was peopled by Belarusian and Ukrainians. So these people knew very well that any cooperation between Poland and Soviet Union will lead this region to leave Poland, and will lead to the land reform that will end their power, since their power is coming from the fact that they are landowners. So it was a class situation, a very clear-cut class situation. It was logical that nobody in the Warsaw elite could accept that. And it was also logical that inside the regime, the only fraction that was tending to some form of cooperation with Soviet Union were on the western borders, where, of course, these issues were not existing. On the western border, their issue was to end the German landowners. And of course, they were ready to give up eastern lands and to take back the lands where the German landowners were using Polish peasants or Polish workers. Because on the other side of the German border, in Silesia especially, you had Polish workers and you had Polish peasants, but they were under German, not only German rule, but they were under German landowners' pressures. So there were also a clear class-cut situation. So I would say that the class situation of Western Poland was standing against German imperialism, and that the class situation of Eastern Poland was pushing Poland to the alliance with Germany against Soviet Union. And this situation ended with the Second World War, when Poland lost Eastern land, and losing Eastern land, Poland lost the social base of the most reactionary Polish classes. So the change of border of Poland at the end of the Second World War was not only a strategical, geographical change, it was also a class change.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. In all these things which you said, we can see that the Polish foreign policy was the catastrophe, because in the September 39, 4 of our neighbors attacked Poland.
Yes.
So Slovakia, Germany.
Poland was hated by all its neighbors for different reasons, of course.
Like today. So thank you very much. And see you next time. I will finish this.